Today, we are examining an important discussion surrounding Iraq's currency reform plans and, specifically, the idea often described as deleting the zeros from the Iraqi dinar. A recent commentary attributed to Newshound guru Sandy Ingram claims that Iraq's new prime minister is moving quickly and has asked for clarification on the laws governing whether zeros can be removed from the dinar without parliamentary approval. That is an interesting development to discuss, but it is also an area where careful distinction is essential. A discussion, proposal, legal review, or request for clarification should not automatically be interpreted as an approved currency redenomination, a new exchange rate, or an imminent revaluation. The central question is what deleting the zeros actually means in economic terms. For Iraqi dinar followers, this distinction is extremely important because the phrase can sound like the currency is suddenly becoming more valuable. In a conventional redenomination, however, the government changes the unit of account rather than creating wealth simply by changing the number of zeros printed on a banknote. For example, under the hypothetical example discussed in this report, a 25,000 dinar note could eventually be represented as 25 new dinars, while a 10,000 dinar note could become 10 new dinars. If the conversion is 1,000 old dinars for one new dinar, the numerical amounts of wages, prices, bank balances, debts, and contracts would normally be converted using the same ratio. That means the purchasing power does not automatically increase simply because the number printed on the note becomes smaller. This is one of the most important points for viewers to understand. Redenomination and revaluation are not the same thing. Redenomination changes the denomination scale. Revaluation changes the external value of a currency relative to other currencies. If Iraq were to remove three zeros through a straightforward redenomination, that would not automatically mean that 1,000 old dinars suddenly become worth 1,000 US dollars, or that an old 25,000 dinar note suddenly gains extraordinary purchasing power. The economic outcome would depend on the conversion rules, the exchange rate framework, inflation conditions, monetary policy, and the credibility of the reform. So, why would a country consider removing zeros in the first place? Currency redenomination can be used to simplify accounting, pricing, cash handling, financial reporting, and everyday transactions when a currency has accumulated very large nominal denominations over time. Smaller numbers can make financial statements easier to read, reduce the number of digits involved in transactions, and potentially improve the usability of the currency for businesses and consumers. But those benefits are operational and structural. They should not be confused with an automatic increase in real wealth. The legal question mentioned in the report is also significant. If Iraq's prime minister is seeking an exact interpretation of whether such a reform could be implemented without parliamentary approval, the important issue is not merely the wording of the currency proposal. It is the broader legal framework governing monetary policy, the authority of the central bank, the powers of the executive branch, and the role of parliament in approving laws that affect the national currency. The precise answer would depend on Iraq's constitution, existing legislation, central bank law, and any specific legislation governing currency issuance and redenomination. Until an official Iraqi authority publishes a formal decision, viewers should treat claims about what can or cannot happen without parliament as a subject for legal and political analysis rather than as a confirmed policy. Another major question is whether removing zeros would require Iraq to print entirely new banknotes. In a conventional redenomination, the answer is generally yes. New denominations would usually be introduced at some stage, because the public needs physical notes that correspond to the new unit. But that does not necessarily mean every old note disappears overnight. Currency reforms are normally carefully managed because a country cannot simply change the notes people use every morning without creating significant disruption. A transition period would therefore be a logical feature of any major redenomination plan. During such a transition, old and new notes could potentially circulate together. Banks could exchange old notes for new notes according to the officially announced conversion ratio. Businesses could display prices in both old and new units for a period of time. Government agencies would need to update accounting systems, salaries, taxes, pensions, contracts, invoices, and financial databases. ATMs, point of sale systems, banking software, cash registers, and accounting platforms would all have to be prepared for the change. This is why a genuine currency redenomination is a much larger operation than simply printing smaller numbers on pieces of paper. It requires coordination across the entire financial and commercial system. The central bank would need a detailed implementation plan. Commercial banks would need operational instructions. Businesses would need guidance, and consumers would need extensive public education. The transition would also require strong controls against fraud, counterfeiting, incorrect conversions, and opportunistic price increases. International experience provides useful context. Countries such as Turkey and Romania have previously implemented redenomination reforms. These examples demonstrate that removing zeros can be technically achievable, but they also show that successful implementation requires careful preparation and clear communication. In Turkey, for example, the lira underwent a major denomination reform in the 2000s, with six zeros removed as part of a broader economic stabilization process. Romania also removed four zeros from its currency in 2005. These reforms were not simply magic changes in purchasing power. They were part of broader monetary and economic circumstances. For Iraq, therefore, the bigger story is not simply whether zeros could be removed. The bigger story is whether Iraq has the institutional stability, banking infrastructure, monetary credibility, fiscal discipline, and public confidence required to make such a reform successful. A currency reform can only work smoothly if people trust banks, understand the conversion process, and believe that the new unit will maintain stable purchasing power. For Iraqi Dinar followers, this has an important short term implication. If official authorities eventually announce a redenomination plan, the first reaction should not be to assume that the dinar has suddenly been revalued. Instead, investors and observers should look for the official conversion ratio, the effective date, the treatment of existing bank deposits, the exchange process for physical currency, the duration of dual circulation, and the rules governing contracts and prices. The second major issue would be the exchange rate. Authorities would need to clearly explain how the existing official exchange rate translates into the new unit. If the currency is redenominated by removing three zeros, the numerical exchange rate would also have to be expressed in the new unit. The underlying economic value would not automatically change simply because the unit changed. This is a critical distinction because many online discussions combine redenomination with expectations of dramatic revaluation. Those are separate policy decisions. In the long term, however, a successful currency reform could have meaningful benefits for Iraq's financial system. A simpler currency structure could make transactions easier, reduce accounting complexity, and potentially support greater efficiency in banking and commerce. But those benefits would depend heavily on broader economic reforms. Iraq would still need to manage inflation, strengthen financial institutions, improve banking practices, diversify government revenues, and maintain confidence in monetary policy. The timing would also matter. Introducing a redenomination during a period of economic instability could create confusion or undermine confidence. Introducing it when inflation is controlled, fiscal policy is credible, banks are functioning effectively, and the public has been adequately informed would provide a much stronger foundation. That brings us back to the statement that Iraq's prime minister is seeking exact legal clarification. If confirmed by official Iraqi sources, that would be worth watching because legal clarification is often an early stage in determining whether a major policy can move forward. But it is still only one piece of a much larger process. Legal authority does not equal final approval. A proposal does not equal implementation. And a redenomination does not automatically equal a revaluation. For viewers following the Iraqi dinar, the most responsible approach is therefore to monitor official announcements from Iraq's government and the Central Bank of Iraq rather than relying solely on speculative commentary. Pay attention to legislation, central bank statements, published currency plans, banking instructions, and formal implementation dates. Those are the signals that can distinguish a genuine policy change from market speculation. The idea of deleting zeros is certainly an important subject because if Iraq were ever to implement such a reform, it could affect virtually every part of the economy, from cash transactions and bank accounts to government budgets and business pricing. But the economic meaning of the reform would depend on the details. A 25,000 dinar note becoming a 25 dinar note under a 1,000 to 1 conversion would represent a change in denomination, not automatically a thousand-fold increase in purchasing power. That distinction should remain at the center of the conversation. Iraqi currency reform can be significant without requiring exaggerated predictions. The strongest analysis is based on what authorities actually announce, how the banking system responds, and whether the reform is supported by sustainable economic fundamentals. As developments continue, the key questions will be whether Iraq formally approves a redenomination plan, what legal authority is required, what conversion ratio would be used, whether new notes would be introduced, how long old and new currency would circulate together, and whether the broader monetary and banking reforms are strong enough to support the transition. We will continue monitoring these developments and separating confirmed information from speculation so that you can better understand what changes in Iraq's currency policy could actually mean. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to subscribe to Iraqi Dinar News and stay connected for responsible, factual, and balanced updates on the Iraqi dinar and Iraq's economy. As always, this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always conduct your own research and consult a qualified financial professional before making any financial decision.